Thank you, choir. Dear God, we ask at this moment that as we consider the gift that our life is, we might turn it as one turns a diamond and see there a new mirror of who we might be called to be. Amen. So let me acknowledge that reading I gave Craig was pretty long, but I think it's one of the best narratives in the Bible. Most of us know the bare bones of the story of the Hebrew baby Moses, who's drawn from water and raised in the palace of Pharaoh, and who grows up not as a prince in Egypt, but as a man destined to be liberator of a slave people who many Egyptians of that day considered to be trash. The story of Moses and the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt is so epic that, we know Hollywood's borrowed from it so liberally. The Prince of Egypt and Cecil B. DeMille's 10 Commandments. What those movies give short shrift to, and what we often forget, are the events that set the stage for Moses. Because for Moses ever to be Moses, there had to be several courageous heroes who paved the way for him. And what is so notable about this list of heroes is that every one of them is a woman, every single one. Moses' mother is one of the Bible's rock stars. She defies Pharaoh by hiding her baby. She took that reed basket, sealed it with black tar. She put the baby in the basket, set the basket in the reeds on the riverbank, but she couldn't have saved him alone, right? If you heard the story, you saw that. Moses' sister stood guard at that moment, so that when Pharaoh's daughter discovered the baby, she said to her, "Shall I go and get you a nurse from among the Hebrew people to nurse the child for you?" Wink, wink, nod, nod. And we know that she won't just get any random woman to nurse the child. And Pharaoh's own daughter is a hero too. The fact makes this story especially interesting because she defies her own father, right? By rescuing the Hebrew baby, going against his edict entirely. And everyone else, is terrified of Pharaoh, but nobody was going to kill this baby if she, Pharaoh's daughter, could stop them. Men in that world, and too often in this one, make bad policy, right? Policy that leads to putting children in cages, and it's left to empathetic women to look hard at the damage and say, just no. A person is still a person, no matter what color they are. And as I said, all of these heroes are women. And not the least among these heroes are the Hebrew midwives who play such important roles in this story and or happen to be known by the names Shifra and Pua. They're right there in the text. Among the likes then of Ruth and Esther and Mary Magdalene, they are among the lesser known women of the Bible, the often forgotten. But note this, that the Hebrew people, the ones who made it out of Egypt, the ones who wandered in the desert for 40 years and finally settled in the land of the promise, they did not forget these women. No, the story of their disobedience to Pharaoh and their decision to choose life over death was told over and over again to generations of young Hebrew children. It was kept alive through their oral tradition until one day someone who feared the story might be lost or who wanted it told in a particular way dictated it to a scribe who wrote it down, and so it was preserved. And when they wrote it down, they remembered to include the names of the two midwives. The name of the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who oppressed and enslaved Moses' people, not so much. He's forgotten. But Pua and Shifra, they are remembered by name. Now, as is often the case in these early books of the Old Testament, these names have particular meanings. Shifra translates as improvement, which I hear may be a reference to the way a midwife would improve the appearance of newborns in her care by cleaning them up, straightening their limbs. And it's thought that the name Pua means cooing, a reference to how a midwife might be the first human to adore the new baby. So we've got cleaning up and adoration here, which makes a really nice, very human combination. Now, one interpreter, Roberta Hestinus, tells us that in ancient Israel, midwives were usually women who couldn't bear children themselves. I don't know if that's true, but it makes an interesting part of the story if it is. We know it was hard for women in that patriarchal world not to have children, especially male children, right? Which was the supreme purpose of womanhood, according to the ancient world. Midwives then had little to leverage for power in that world. They were essentially then objects brought in to deliver babies and then excused when the birth was over. But here we have these two courageous women facing off with the most powerful man in the world. And they do so not in some dramatic, spectacular event, but by simply using the one thing they know how to do best, deliver babies. Emily Sylvester, in a lovely sermon entitled The Midwives, says, Pua and Shifra made God's presence tangible in their world. They had a vocation, a calling. They'd witnessed the mystery of life and death and had taken the oath of their calling to in all ways serve life. So when Pharaoh ordered them to essentially commit genocide and to kill every newborn Hebrew boy, they deliberately said no. They could have said that they were too weak or too ordinary to make a difference, right? They could have used the excuse that it wasn't their policy, they were just following someone's orders. They could even have justified their actions with the fear that their own lives would be taken from them if they didn't execute these babies. But for these midwives, God was more real to them than Pharaoh that stood right in front of them. And they chose to side with a God who entreats us to choose life over a tyrant who commands us to choose death. Maybe that's why they had decided to become midwives in the first place, to be the ones to do their best, to ease the burdens of their sisters in the critical moment of bringing forth life. They knew how cruel and oppressive this world could be, that these boys would grow up to be slaves. But each time they held new life in their hands, each time they witnessed the miracle of birth, their hope and belief in life was inevitably renewed. These women, too stubborn to give up on life, too compassionate to take it, kept delivering babies, and in doing so, they changed the course of history, one crying baby at a time. They found themselves in a unique position of power, and they used that opportunity to make a difference. And in this way, they were midwives not just to individual babies, but to an entire people. So, amazing things are possible if we take what we've been given, our own lives, and find ways to use it for the betterment of the world, just like these midwives who were considered second or third or fourth class people. Whatever privilege you were born with, whatever gift you were given, whatever you know how to do, be it delivering babies or delivering the mail, God calls us to use that where we are. So, by way of example, I remember living in my first apartment, the Sandy Crest Apartments, in my first pastoral position in Northeast Portland, 60th and Sandy, I think it was, I had this mailman at the time who I noticed was always looking in my windows when he came around to deliver the mail. And I thought he was either a busybody or a peeping Tom. And then one morning he showed up in the Oregonian. Come to find out, he had saved several heart attack victims he had seen lying on the floor in their homes. And he had delivered, speaking of midwives, 3 babies. 3 babies while on his route. He had realized early on that there was a special calling within his calling. His job wasn't just to deliver the mail, it was to deliver babies. It was to look out, in fact, for every single one of us on his route every day. Now think of the implications of that, and the calling of the Hebrew midwives too. It sounds almost too easy in a way. We get to be exactly who we were designed to be, but by doing that with an added sense of calling, believing that we're in the right place to do whatever it is we're called to do, we can make the world a very much better place. Now, our cats and dogs know this, right? They go along with their doggy lives, and life for those they love and are loved by is more bearable, right? Because they jump into your lap or put their heads in your hands right when you need affection most and diversion too. We, all of us, live in a broken and complicated world where we at times stray from what God intends for us. As humans, we often make this world, not even trying, we just do sometimes, make it more inhospitable than hospitable. And like Pharaoh, we act out of fear, holding on desperately to our status, to our way of life, which we've become accustomed to, even if it means that other people and the earth and its creatures end up being exploited for our own comfort. And in the midst of our brokenness, it's difficult to conceive of a different way. That's what we're working against here. But Emily Sylvester says, God is in labor to give birth to a new world. And God can't do it alone. God needs our help. God needs us to be her midwives so that a new creation can in fact be born. And as any woman who has given birth will tell you, labor is no picnic, right? There can be complications. It can take forever. Well, giving birth to a new world, a new creation, is going to be difficult too. Unfortunately, people with great power and privilege don't always make it any easier. Pharaoh was the most powerful man in his day, and look how he used his power, only for himself. It's right in the text. Well, if one is looking for a modern version of Pharaoh, you could do a lot worse than putting a spotlight on Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, right? The latest light trained on him by his former employee and now whistleblower Francishaugen caught him wearing no clothes at all. In front of Congress, she detailed, and you heard this, right? Her vast knowledge of the internal workings of the company through both her position and also thousands of pages of internal documents that she shared with lawmakers. And she explained the technical workings of Facebook's platforms right there, clearly, uncomplicatedly, citing specific examples of the harms they cause, harms that you cannot deny. She told lawmakers that Facebook's products harm children, stoke division, weaken our democracy, and put profit over moral responsibility every day. Now, although she was highly critical of Facebook, what made her so credible as a witness was that she was constructive and even hopeful about Facebook. These problems are solvable, she said. A safer, free speech, respecting, more enjoyable social media is possible. Facebook can change, but is clearly not going to do so on its own. This is how a democracy works. Francishaugen even said she would work for the company again, if given the chance. Not everybody heard that. She also said she's against breaking up Facebook, instead emphasizing collaborative solutions with Congress, right? Or else, quote, she said, these systems are going to continue to exist and be dangerous, even if they're broken up. So don't take the easy way out, she said. She's very astute. Then she suggested, and this is why I brought it into this sermon today, she suggested that Congress give Facebook the chance to, quote, declare moral bankruptcy, and we can figure out how to fix these things together. I just was really stunned by this. Asked to clarify what she meant by moral bankruptcy, she said she envisioned a process like financial bankruptcy, where there is a, quote, mechanism to forgive them and move forward. She said Facebook is stuck in a feedback loop that they can't get out of on their own. They need to admit first, this is like AA, they need to admit first that they did something wrong and that they need help to solve their problem. And that's what moral bankruptcy is, she said. What just was like, I could not believe what I was hearing. Sadly, predictably maybe, Mark Zuckerberg just doubled down on his denials and then did what all people like him do. He attempted to smear the eyewitness. That's just pitiful. On Friday, a Philippine journalist who I have followed for years, Reyes, won a share of this year's Nobel Prize for Journalism. She has been harassed by the tyrannical government of her country for over a decade and threatened always with prison. Still, she keeps on refusing to stop speaking truth to power so eloquently. And she used her moment in the spotlight to target Facebook to show that this is a worldwide thing, not a national thing. To spotlight Facebook for prioritizing profits over the lives of children. We are in a time when people are not afraid to speak up for our kids, and it is about time. God bless those two women. But look, those two women, remember Pua and Shifra? Remember Reyes and Francishaugen. But look, we are all of us called to be midwives that usher in life and change for the benefit of children, especially in the midst of the kind of world we live in where lies are trumping the truth every day. We are meant to be midwives who choose to stand with the oppressed and the marginalized, even if it means disobeying the powers and principalities that rule this world. And this is no new thing. This goes back to the Bible. We are midwives who, unlike Pharaoh, are not afraid to look into the eyes of those who are considered expendable and to see instead a life worth saving. And we don't have to do this alone. This is really important. That's one reason we're here together today, right? That's what church is about. I mean, the way Christians have always understood that God becomes the most real to us is in community. It's why we have something called communion. at that table. We are all of us needing a community of faithful friends to accompany us in our faith journey, to help remind us of God's presence in this world and our special calling within that. Roberta Hestonus notes that when the midwives had to meet the challenge of evil, they had a companion, a friend, a colleague who stood among them, Shifra and Pua too. We too need the company of others as we commit to follow in their bold footsteps. We may think the world is going to hell in these difficult days. It's easy to just say, I'm not even going to listen to the news. No. These are merely birth pangs on the way to the birth of a more beautiful and just world, where hate and lying that we see way too much of today may in fact be shown for what it is, especially when women like Francishaugen and Maria Ressa step up and use their bully pulpits to tell us the truth. I have to believe this. I have to believe it. It's part of our collective calling to hold them up in the light of God. Amen.